The crystal chandeliers of the Belmont estate sparkled like frozen tears above the crowd of Manhattan's elite. Vincent Castellano stood at the altar in his custom Armani tuxedo, his dark eyes scanning the sea of faces that had gathered to witness what the tabloids were calling the wedding of the decade. At 38, he had built an empire that stretched from the docks of New Jersey to the penthouses of Wall Street, though most people whispered about the darker foundations of his fortune. His bride, Sophia Eriksson, was everything a man in his position needed. Blonde, educated at Yale, daughter of a Swedish diplomat with connections that could legitimize his business ventures. She floated down the aisle in a Vera Wang gown that cost more than most people earned in a year, her smile practiced and perfect. But Vincent's attention kept drifting to the edges of the ballroom, where the staff moved like shadows, particularly to one woman. She had been introduced to him 3 months ago as Clara Washington, recommended by his mother's friend to help with the household preparations for the wedding. A quiet black woman in her early 30s who kept her eyes down and her answers short. She cleaned his office, served his coffee, and seemed to disappear into the walls when not needed. Something about her had always felt off to Vincent. The way her hands moved too carefully when she dusted his desk. How she never flinched when his men discussed business within earshot. The brief moment he caught her reflection in a window, and her expression was not that of a frightened maid but something calculating, almost predatory. The ceremony began. Father Murphy's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling as he spoke of love and commitment. Vincent's lieutenant, Marco, stood beside him as best man, while Sophia's sister adjusted her train. 200 guests sat in gilded chairs, sipping champagne that cost $300 a bottle. Clara stood near the kitchen entrance in her black uniform, holding a silver tray. Her hair was pulled back tight, her makeup minimal. To everyone else, she was invisible. Help, staff, background noise. Vincent said his vows, his voice steady and commanding. Sophia repeated hers with the rehearsed emotion of someone who had practiced in front of a mirror. The priest asked if anyone objected to this union. The pause that followed should have lasted 2 seconds. It lasted 10. Then Clara stepped forward. The tray clattered to the marble floor. The sound sliced through the cathedral silence like a gunshot. Every head turned. Sophia's smile froze. Marco's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. Clara walked down the center aisle, and with each step, something about her changed. Her posture straightened. Her downcast eyes lifted and burned with an intensity that made the temperature in the room drop. She pulled the pins from her hair, letting dark curls fall around her shoulders. When she reached the altar, she was no longer the meek maid who had scrubbed floors and served meals. "Vincent," she said, and her voice carried the authority of someone used to giving orders, not taking them. Her accent had shifted, the southern softness replaced with sharp New York edges. "We need to talk about your wedding gift. Who the hell do you think you are?" Sophia hissed, her perfect composure cracking. Clara turned to her with a smile that held no warmth. "Someone you should have done a better background check on, Mrs. Almost Castellano." Vincent's mind raced through possibilities. FBI? DA? A rival family's plant? But none of those made sense. The feds would have waited. A rival would have struck differently. Marco pulled his weapon, but Vincent raised a hand to stop him. Clara reached into her uniform and pulled out a photograph. She held it up for Vincent to see. It showed him at age 12, standing beside a woman with warm eyes and the same dark curls Clara had. The woman had her hand on young Vincent's shoulder. Behind them was a small house in Queens, before the money, before the empire. "That woman was my mother," Clara said quietly. "Maria Santos. You knew her as Maria, the woman who worked for your family when you were a kid. The woman who covered for you when you stole from your father's safe. Who fed you when he locked you in the basement. Who saved your life when his enemies came for you." Vincent's face went pale. He remembered. Sweet Maria, who had been more mother to him than his own. Who had disappeared one night when he was 14. His father said she had stolen from them and run away. Vincent had believed it because he had been a child, and children believe what they are told by the adults who hold all the power. "She didn't steal anything," Clara continued, her voice hardening. Your father killed her because she knew too much about his operations. Dumped her body in the East River. And I have spent 15 years becoming exactly what I needed to be to get close to you. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and rushed toward the exits. Marco lunged forward, but 3 men in waiter uniforms moved faster, revealing weapons that had been hidden beneath their jackets. They weren't Vincent's men. They were Clara's. Sophia stumbled backward, her veil catching on a flower arrangement and tearing. Her father, the dignified diplomat, pushed through the crowd trying to reach her, shouting in Swedish for security. Vincent stood frozen at the altar, staring at the photograph. Maria's face looked back at him through time. He remembered her humming in the kitchen, the way she would sneak him cookies when his father was in one of his rages. How she had pressed a $100 bill into his hand the night before she disappeared and told him to hide it somewhere safe, that he might need it someday. You're lying, Vincent said, but his voice lacked conviction. My father said she stole $50,000 and ran off with some man. Clara laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the marble columns. Your father said a lot of things. He also said he was a legitimate businessman. He said he never ordered hits on families with children. He said he loved your mother while he was beating her unconscious every Saturday night. She stepped closer, and Vincent could see tears forming in her eyes, though her voice remained steel. I was 17 when they pulled my mother's body from the river. 17 when the police called it a suicide. 17 when I realized that people like your family face no consequences because they own the cops, the judges, the entire system. So I stopped being Clarissa Santos, honor student from Queens. I became whoever I needed to be. The guests were gone now. Only Vincent's inner circle remained, surrounded by Clara's people. Marco had a gun pressed to his temple by a man twice his size. Sophia sobbed near the overturned cake, mascara running down her face like black rivers. Vincent's mind spun through the past 3 months. Every conversation, every moment Clara had been in his home. She had access to everything. His files, his safe, his private meetings. She had been standing right there when he discussed the new heroin shipment from Colombia. When he ordered the execution of the informant in witness protection. When he laughed about bribing the district attorney. What do you want? Vincent asked quietly. Revenge? To kill me in front of everyone? You could have done that 100 times in the past 3 months. Clara pulled out her phone and held it up. The screen showed a recording application. Every conversation was there, time-stamped and backed up to servers he could never reach. I want justice, she said. The kind my mother never got. You have 2 choices, Vincent. You can spend the rest of your life in a supermax prison, or you can help me destroy the empire your father built. Starting with the man who actually pulled the trigger. Your uncle. Your best man at this wedding. Marco Castellano. Marco's face drained of color. The gun against his temple pressed harder as he tried to speak, but no words came out. Vincent turned slowly to face the man who had stood beside him for 20 years. His brother in everything but blood. Tell him it's a lie, Marco. Tell him you didn't kill Maria. Marco's silence was deafening. Clara walked toward him, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. She stopped inches from his face, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 15 years of grief transformed into cold determination. August 14, 2009. You picked her up outside St. Anthony's Church after evening mass. Told her Vincent's father wanted to talk to her about a raise. She got in your car believing she was finally going to get the recognition she deserved for her loyalty. Instead, you drove her to the pier, shot her twice in the chest, weighted her body down with chains, and you went home and slept like a baby. Marco's jaw clenched. His eyes darted to Vincent, searching for something, salvation perhaps, or permission to explain away the inexplicable. She knew about the Giordano deal, Marco finally said, his voice rough. She overheard your father setting up the hit on their entire family. Women, children, everyone. She was going to the feds. I had no choice. Vincent's fist connected with Marco's jaw before anyone could stop him. The sound of bone meeting bone cracked through the room. Marco fell to his knees, blood pouring from his mouth. Vincent stood over him, chest heaving, 15 years of buried memories flooding back. Maria's kindness, her gentle hands bandaging his wounds. The last time he saw her, when she looked at him with such sadness, as if she knew something terrible was coming. "You murdered the only person who ever gave a damn about me," Vincent said quietly. "You let me believe she abandoned me." Clara watched the scene unfold with grim satisfaction, but also something else, a flicker of surprise. She had expected Vincent to choose loyalty to his family over truth. Most men in his position would have. But grief was rewriting the equations of power right before her eyes. She cleared her throat. If you're listening to this story and wondering what happens next, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. Because what comes next changes everything, not just for Vincent, but for every person who thought they knew how this world really works. Vincent looked up at Clara, blood on his knuckles, his wedding day in ruins around him. "What happens now?" "Now," Clara said, pulling out a folder thick with documents, "we take down everyone who built their fortune on my mother's grave. But I need your help. You know things I don't. Access I can't get. We do this together, or Marco here becomes the first domino to fall while you rot in a cell next to him." 3 months later, Vincent sat in a safe house in Brooklyn, watching surveillance footage on 6 different monitors. The crystal chandeliers and designer suits were gone. Now he wore jeans and a plain black shirt, his beard growing out for the first time in 20 years. Clara sat across from him, her hair now cut short, dressed in tactical gear. The transformation had been brutal. Vincent had turned over every file, every contact, every dirty secret his family had buried. The FBI had given Clara immunity in exchange for the empire she was delivering on a silver platter. But it wasn't the feds they were working with tonight. It was something else entirely. "Your Uncle Anthony is meeting with the Bratva tonight," Clara said, pointing to a warehouse on the screen. "He's trying to consolidate power after Marco's arrest. If we can get him on tape negotiating the arms deal, that's 25 to life minimum." Vincent nodded. His Uncle Anthony had raised him after his father died. Taught him how to shoot, how to negotiate, how to bury bodies where they'd never be found. The betrayal tasted like ash in his mouth, but Maria's face kept appearing in his dreams, reminding him why he was doing this. They moved through the night like ghosts. Clara's team had grown, former military, ex-intelligence, people who had their own scores to settle with the Castellano Empire. Vincent led them through the warehouse using routes only family members knew, past guards who still trusted his face. Inside the main room, Anthony stood with 4 Russian mobsters discussing shipments of automatic weapons. Vincent's chest tightened. He had been in this room 100 times, making the same deals, believing it was all part of the game. Clara's voice came through his earpiece. "Recording is clean. We have everything we need. Get out." But Vincent didn't move. He stepped into the light instead. Anthony's face registered shock, then rage. "You're supposed to be dead, you traitorous piece of garbage. Marco said you'd gone soft over some dead maid." "Maria," Vincent corrected quietly. Her name was Maria, and she was worth more than every person in this room combined. The Russians reached for their weapons, but Clara's team was faster. Red laser sights painted every chest in the room. Federal agents poured in from every entrance. Anthony lunged at Vincent with a knife, screaming obscenities, but Vincent sidestepped and brought him down with a move Maria's son would have been proud of. As they handcuffed his uncle, Vincent felt something break inside him. Not his spirit, but the chains that had bound him to a legacy of violence. He had spent his entire life becoming his father, and it took Maria's daughter to show him he could choose differently. Clara appeared beside him as they led Anthony away. "You did good," she said softly. For the first time in months, Vincent met her eyes without shame. The courtroom was packed 6 months later. Vincent sat in the witness box, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to do. Across the room, 12 members of his former organization sat in defendant chairs, including his uncle Anthony, whose eyes burned with hatred so intense it could have melted steel. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Chun, approached with a file folder that contained 15 years of evidence. But she didn't need most of it. She had Vincent. "Mr. Castellano, Please tell the court what happened on August 14, 2009. Vincent's voice was clear as he detailed Maria's murder. Every word felt like pulling shrapnel from a wound. He described how Marco had confessed, how the order had come from his father, how an entire organization had conspired to silence a woman whose only crime was having a conscience. Clara sat in the gallery, wearing a simple black dress. Her eyes never left Vincent's face. She had spent 15 years preparing for this moment, and now it was finally here. Justice, cold and precise, delivered in a windowless room under fluorescent lights. The defense attorneys tried everything. They attacked Vincent's credibility, called him a liar, a traitor, a criminal trying to save himself. But the recordings didn't lie. The bodies they had found didn't lie. The paper trail of corruption that stretched from City Hall to the governor's mansion didn't lie. When the jury returned after 8 hours of deliberation, the foreman stood with a piece of paper that would rewrite New York's criminal history. On all counts, guilty. Anthony exploded from his seat, screaming that Vincent was a dead man, that his bloodline was cursed, that he would burn in hell. The marshals dragged him away as he thrashed and cursed. One by one, the others were led out in chains. Marco, who had already pled guilty, watched from a separate section, his face empty of everything except regret that came too late. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed like locusts. Clara and Vincent slipped out through a side entrance where an unmarked car waited. They drove in silence through Queens, past neighborhoods where both of them had grown up in different worlds that occasionally intersected in tragedy. The car stopped at Calvary Cemetery. They walked together to a freshly installed headstone. Maria Santos, it read, "Beloved Mother, taken too soon. Justice delayed but not denied." Clara knelt and placed fresh lilies against the stone. Vincent stood behind her, hands in his pockets, not knowing what to say or do. Finally, he knelt beside her. "I'm sorry I didn't remember sooner," he said. "I'm sorry I became everything she tried to save me from." Clara turned to him, and for the first time since the wedding, her expression softened. "She helped save you once. Maybe she's still saving you now. The question is what you do with this second chance." Vincent looked at Maria's name carved in granite and made a promise he intended to keep. 5 years later, the community center in Queens buzzed with activity. Children laughed in the after-school program. Teenagers worked on computers in the tech lab. Adults attended job training classes in rooms that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Vincent walked through the main hall, checking on renovations to the new wing. He wore work boots and a flannel shirt, his hands calloused from actual labor for the first time in his life. The building had once been a warehouse owned by his family, a place where they had stored stolen goods and laundered money. Now it was the Maria Santos Community Foundation, funded entirely by the seized assets from the Castellano Empire. "Mr. Castellano," a young girl called out, running up with a drawing. "Look what I made in art class." He knelt down to her level, studying the colorful picture of a woman with kind eyes. "That's beautiful, Sophia. Is that your mom?" "No," the girl said proudly. "Miss Clara told us about a lady named Maria who helped people. So I drew her." Vincent's throat tightened. He thanked the girl and watched her run back to join her friends. Clara emerged from her office, now the foundation's director. Her hair had grown out again, and she wore it natural. The hardness that had defined her for so long had softened into something more sustainable, a quiet strength rather than burning rage. "The new mentorship program is fully enrolled," she said, falling into step beside him. "We have 40 kids matched with professionals from every field. 2 of them just got accepted to college with full scholarships." "Maria would be proud," Vincent said. Clara smiled. "I think she'd be shocked. The son of the man who ordered her death, running a nonprofit that helps kids like we used to be? That's not redemption you can buy. That's something you have to build every single day." They stepped outside where a mural covered the entire side of the building. Maria's face, painted in vibrant colors by local artists, watched over the neighborhood. Beneath it, the words, "Everyone deserves someone who believes in them." Vincent had testified at 16 more trials, written a book about organized crime that became mandatory reading in law schools. divorced himself completely from the life that had once defined him. Some nights he still woke up hearing Anthony's threats or Marco's justifications. But most nights he slept peacefully, knowing that Maria's death had not been meaningless. Clara stood beside him, looking at the mural. "We did it," she said quietly. "Not the way I planned, but we did it." Vincent nodded. "Thank you for not killing me at that wedding." She laughed. "Thank you for choosing differently than I expected. If you've watched this story until the very end, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. If this moved you, please hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove people can change, that justice sometimes wins, and that the most powerful weapon we have is the truth. What story should we tell next? Let us know below.